Every damn year. Burnt marshmallows on top of sweet potatoes, dry turkey drowned in too much gravy, and that faint scent of dust from a dining room that only gets used once every 12 months. I stood on the porch of my mother's house for a good 5 minutes before I finally rang the doorbell. Part of me hoped nobody would answer. Part of me hoped they forgot I was coming. But of course, that would have been too easy. The door swung open with that familiar creak, and there she was, my mother, Helen, with her lips pinched tight and her eyes already disappointed. "Oh, you came," she said flatly, not even moving to hug me. "Well, don't just stand there. Shoes off." I stepped inside, suddenly 12 years old again, shrinking in that narrow hallway lined with photos I was never in. Jake with his football trophy. Melissa at prom. My parents' wedding photo. Even our old dog Buster had a spot on the wall, right above the damn thermostat. I was nowhere to be found. The dining room buzzed with fake warmth, the kind people microwave at holidays to look like family. Jake, in his tight golf shirt and smug grin, raised a beer and said, "Look who finally decided to show up. Must be cold down in hell." Melissa chuckled from behind a mountain of mashed potatoes. I forced a smile, the kind I'd mastered long ago, small, tight, invisible unless you were looking for it. Dinner started like always. My mother led the prayer like she had a direct line to Jesus, even though she hadn't stepped into a church since my dad's funeral 23 years ago. Jake interrupted halfway through to make a dumb joke about Melissa's third divorce. Everyone laughed. I stayed quiet, head down, chewing on dry turkey and swallowing down the rising bile. I spoke maybe 3 sentences all night. No one asked about my job. No one cared where I was living. I might as well have been the ghost of Thanksgivings past, floating around with a plate nobody bothered to refill. But it was when dessert hit the table that the real punch came. My mother took a sip of her boxed wine, looked straight at me across the table, and said, "You know, Daniel, I only invite you out of pity. Otherwise, this table wouldn't be so damn gloomy." Jake laughed so hard he choked on his pie. Melissa wiped tears from her eyes and said, "Mom, stop. You'll kill him." Like it was a joke. Like I hadn't heard versions of that line since I was a kid, hiding in the garage with my Walkman on full blast just to drown out their voices. I stared at my plate for a while. There was a chunk of cranberry sauce on the edge that looked like a bloodstain. Fitting. I didn't say a word. Didn't throw my drink. Didn't storm out like I used to in my 20s when I still thought yelling back would change something. I just picked up the empty plates like I always did. Cleared the dishes like I was the help. Washed them while they sat in the living room, half drunk and snorting at reruns on the TV. Nobody offered to help, not even Melissa, who always used to pretend to care when no one was watching. The kitchen light flickered a bit as I scrubbed the dried stuffing off the plates. Something about it made me pause. Like the house was warning me. Or maybe I was just tired. Maybe this was what family looked like for some people, tight smiles, shallow jabs, and empty apologies that never got said. I dried my hands on the towel I always hated, stitched with some quote about gratitude, and stepped out onto the porch, needing air more than I needed closure. It was cold out. Not snow on the ground cold, but the kind that creeps into your bones and makes you remember every mistake you ever made. I lit a cigarette I hadn't touched in months. I didn't even smoke anymore. But sometimes your body remembers the habits your mind let go of. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. "Daniel Price," the voice said. Male, crisp, too awake for this late at night. "Yeah, speaking. This is Robert Kelman. I'm your grandfather George's estate attorney." I straightened up, the air turning sharp in my lungs. "Your grandfather passed away this morning. I'm sorry to tell you like this, but I've been trying to reach you all day. He left something for you. Well, everything, actually. The entire estate. Farm, savings, house. Everything. You're the sole beneficiary." Silence hung between us like fog. My grandfather, George Price, had died. And somehow I was the only one he left anything to. I stood there on that porch, listening to my family laugh inside, their voices muffled and oblivious, and felt something strange stir in my chest. It wasn't grief. It was something colder. And it tasted a little like revenge. I drove north through the back roads of Michigan, windows cracked just enough to let the cold bite through my jacket, that stale November air carrying the scent of something long dead, leaves, memories, maybe just old bitterness finally beginning to rot. The further I got from my mother's house, the clearer my head became, like crossing some invisible boundary between who they told me I was and who I'd finally get to be. The road to Grandpa's farm hadn't changed a bit. Same gravel crunch under the tires, same rusted street signs half swallowed by the woods, same silence pressing in on all sides like an old friend who didn't need to speak to be heard. I hadn't been there in over 10 years, not since the Christmas I brought him a bottle of scotch and sat with him in the barn while he told stories about his army days, the ones nobody else wanted to hear. My siblings never came to visit him. Not once. Said he smelled like smoke and stubbornness, said the farm was boring, said he was too old to matter. But to me, Grandpa George was the only real blood I had. He saw me, like really saw me, not as the weird quiet kid who stayed in the basement, not as the mistake my mom never shut up about, but as someone worth the time it took to speak kindly. I pulled into the gravel drive and sat in the car for a long while, staring at the old barn that had somehow outlived 2 tornadoes and a fire. The house leaned a little more than I remembered, the paint peeling like a memory trying too hard to hold on, but it still stood there, solid, unmoved, waiting for me. Inside, the place smelled like pine cleaner and coffee, like Grandpa had just stepped out to check the fence. The lawyer was already there, sitting in Grandpa's worn recliner like it wasn't sacred. His name was Robert Kelman, youngish, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't waste words. He stood when I walked in, extended a hand that felt too clean for a house like this. "Mr. Price," he said, polite but professional, like he was trying to stay detached from whatever bomb he was about to drop. "Your grandfather had a very clear sense of how he wanted his estate handled." I sat at the kitchen table where Grandpa used to stack mail and unpaid bills. I remember once asking him if he was worried about losing the farm, and he just laughed, said the bank can have his land when they pull it out of his cold, dead hands. Well, I guess they never got the chance. Robert slid a thick envelope across the table and opened a folder with more documents than I could count. "Your grandfather left you everything," he said. "The land, currently valued at approximately $70,000, plus assets, stocks, accounts. Combined, it comes to a total somewhere around $1.2 billion. I blinked, confused, the number sounding too big, too surreal. Wait, did he mean million? No, he said billion. That can't be right. He kept talking, rattling off account numbers, property details, tax obligations, and trusts with my name on them. I tried to focus, but the words started swimming. All I could see was Grandpa's face, the way he used to smirk after telling me something heavy, like he knew it would take me years to unpack it. I remembered one summer evening, I was about 15, and he took me out to the edge of the property. We stood there as the sun dipped behind the tree line, and he said, "One day, they're all gonna see who you really are. But don't rush it. Let em laugh now. You'll have the last word." At the time, I thought he was just humoring me, maybe trying to soften the sting after another cruel joke from Jake or a screaming match with my mom. But now, sitting there with papers naming me sole heir, I realized he'd meant every damn word. Not a cent for Jake. Not a spoon for Melissa. Not even a photo for my mother. He'd left them all out like last week's trash, and I was the only one he trusted not to ruin what he built. I took the pen Robert offered me and signed the document slowly, carefully, feeling the weight of every letter. With each stroke, I felt something old in me crack and fall away, like years of swallowing pain finally turning into steel. By the time I was done, I didn't just own Grandpa's farm. I owned my mother's house. I owned the house she kicked me out of at 17 when she found out I'd dropped out of college. I owned the house where she told me I was a disappointment. The same house where Jake got a new car for graduation and I got a garbage bag of hand-me-downs. And now, I could sell it tomorrow if I wanted. I could put her on the curb with nothing but memories and regret. I looked out the window at the field stretching into the distance and whispered something I hadn't said in years. Let the games begin. The morning after I signed my name on the papers that changed the entire course of this family's crooked little history, I drove back to my mother's house as if it were any other Sunday after Thanksgiving. The kind where everyone pretends not to be hungover and shovels leftover stuffing into plastic containers like it's some kind of sacrament. The sky was overcast in that classic Midwest way, gray and still like even God had taken the weekend off and left us all to our own quiet miseries. I didn't blast music this time. I didn't need noise to fill the space. Silence, I was learning, could be louder than any argument. I walked in through the back door without knocking, like always. The kitchen was filled with the smell of reheated ham and cheap coffee. Melissa sat at the table in leggings and one of those oversized sweatshirts that screamed post-divorce comfort. She was already deep into her third story about the emotional sabotage her latest ex-husband put her through. Jake was there too, leaning back in one of the creaky wooden chairs with his phone in hand, lecturing no one in particular about how Bitcoin was about to explode again and that now was the time to invest. My mother was at the counter, pouring herself another glass of whatever box of wine hadn't been finished the night before. I watched her swirl it around like she thought she was some kind of sommelier and not just an old woman with too much bitterness and too few people willing to stay around long enough to listen to it. "Morning," I said, pulling up a chair like I didn't already own it. They glanced up at me like I was a stray cat they thought they'd already shooed away the night before. Melissa offered a weak smile. Jake didn't even look away from his screen. My mother sighed. "You're still here?" she asked, like my presence was giving her indigestion. "Thought you'd crawl back to whatever rock you've been hiding under." I let that one slide, because I had something better in my pocket than any comeback she'd thrown at me since I was 15. I sat there quietly while they talked over each other, the same way they always had, Melissa rambling about how she needed space to heal, Jake ranting about crypto and inflation like he had any idea what the hell he was talking about. They didn't ask me a single question. Not one. It was like I wasn't even there, which, honestly, was perfect. I waited until the room dipped into that lull between stories, Jake finishing a rant about the economy, Melissa reaching for her lukewarm coffee, and then I said it, like I was commenting on the weather. "Grandpa died yesterday." That shut everyone up. Forks stopped clinking. Chairs creaked as they leaned in. My mother turned around slowly, wine glass still in her hand. "You serious?" Jake asked, finally putting his phone down. "Yeah," I said. "Lawyer called me last night." There was a pause, the kind that stretches long enough to see what people are really made of. My mother pursed her lips and said, "Well, he probably left everything to the church. You know how your grandfather was." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the papers, thick and stamped and official as hell. I placed them in the middle of the table like I was laying down a royal flush in a game they didn't even realize they were losing. "He left everything to me," I said, watching their faces shift from curiosity to disbelief to something close to horror. "The farm, the land, the accounts, all of it." "You're lying," my mother snapped, already moving forward like she was going to snatch the documents out of my hands and somehow rewrite them with her bare fingers. I slid them across the table instead. Let her see for herself. She flipped through the first few pages, her hands starting to tremble. Melissa leaned over her shoulder, eyes wide and blinking fast like someone had just slapped her awake. Jake just stared, jaw slack, arms crossed like he was trying to hold himself together. This can't be legal," my mother muttered. "He was old. Senile. He didn't know what he was doing." "He did," I said, calm as a Sunday sermon. "He knew exactly what he was doing. He made the decision years ago." Melissa started crying, not hard, just soft little hiccups like someone who'd suddenly realized the safety net wasn't there anymore. Jake looked like he wanted to punch something, his face all red and puffed up with years of ego suddenly collapsing on itself. "You think this is funny?" he barked at me, standing now, hands clenched. "You think you can walk in here with a bunch of paperwork and just take everything?" "I didn't take anything," I said, sipping from the same chipped mug I used when I was a teenager. "It was given to me." The room turned sour in seconds. My mother slammed the papers back down on the table like they'd burned her fingers. "He was a senile bastard," she said, her voice sharp and cracking. You manipulated him somehow. You poisoned him against us. He saw you, I said, and my voice finally rose, not loud, but strong. He saw all of you for what you are. Silence fell again. This time, it wasn't awkward. It was something heavier. Something final. I stood up, slow and deliberate, letting the weight of what I was about to say sit with them for a second longer. Oh, and one more thing, I added, grabbing my coat. This house? You're living in it because Grandpa never put it in your name. He still owned it. Which means I own it now. My mother stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. You've got 30 days to leave, I said, already halfway out the door. After that, I'm selling it. Nobody followed me outside. Nobody said a damn word. The wind was picking up again, and as I walked toward my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. Let the panic set in. Let it ferment. Let them taste, for once, what it's like to live with the consequences of who they really are. I didn't expect them to give up easily, because people like my family never admit defeat until the door is locked and they've got nowhere left to bang their fists. I'd barely made it through the week when the phone calls started, first from Melissa, her voice syrupy and soft in a way that instantly made my skin crawl, asking how I'd been, how I was holding up after Grandpa's passing. As if she hadn't laughed at me 2 nights ago like I was a circus act she couldn't wait to see fall off the tightrope. I didn't answer at first, let it go to voicemail, and then another voicemail, and then a long text full of smiley faces and fake warmth, ending with, maybe we could meet for coffee? Just us. Like old times. Old times? She hadn't willingly sat across from me in public since I was 17, and she told her friends I was adopted because she didn't want them knowing I was her actual brother. But sure, coffee. Like old times. I never answered. I didn't need to. Jake came next, in person of course, pounding on the front door of Grandpa's house like he was trying to shake the whole porch loose. He didn't even wait for an invite before stomping in, dressed in his usual uniform of tight jeans and false confidence, that same overpriced watch he got during his short-lived financial advisor phase glinting in the light like it still meant something. He started with jokes, of course, called me the King of Dirt and Prince of Cornfields, made a few cracks about me being the rich farmer now. But when I didn't laugh, when I didn't offer him coffee or even a damn seat, the tone shifted real fast. He went straight to the bargaining table. Listen, he said, sitting anyway, like he owned the right to be comfortable in this house. I know we've had our shit. But business is business, right? You've got land, assets, and probably no clue what to do with any of it. I can help you manage it. You throw me, let's say, 500 grand, just a fraction of what you've got, and I'll get it moving. You'll double that in a year. I stared at him, just long enough to make him squirm. How's the crypto going? I asked. His face flushed. It's a long-term game. Sounds like you need the money more than I need your advice, I said, standing and opening the front door wide. Now get the hell out of my house. The next morning, my mother showed up with a walker. It wasn't even a good one, clearly borrowed from someone at her church group. She hobbled in like she was auditioning for a sympathy award, leaning heavily, groaning dramatically with every step. But I'd seen her move just fine a few days ago. I'd seen her power walk from the kitchen to the liquor cabinet during halftime without spilling a drop. Now suddenly she needed help getting up the steps? Oh, Daniel, she croaked, lowering herself into Grandpa's recliner like it was a throne she deserved. I've been meaning to tell you. I'm not well. The doctors, they think it could be serious. Something neurological. She let the sentence hang in the air like smoke from a cheap candle. I didn't offer her a drink. I didn't even ask which doctor. I just watched her squirm under the weight of my silence. She finally cut the act, dropped the walker like it was made of paper, and leaned in close. You're really going to do this? She hissed. Kick your own mother out of her home? After everything I gave up for you. I looked her dead in the eye and said the quiet part out loud. You never gave anything up for me. You took from me. Years, dignity, chances. You built yourself up by tearing me down, and now I'm supposed to feel guilty because the tower's crumbling. She slapped me. Not hard, but enough. It didn't hurt. But it burned. Later that week, I made a phone call to an old friend of Grandpa's, a retired reporter named Dean who still ran a local blog with a surprising number of readers. I gave him everything. The truth about my father. The truth my mother buried deeper than his casket. My father didn't die in a car crash like we were told. He drove himself off that bridge because he couldn't take the years of verbal poison my mother fed him, day after day, until his mind cracked like glass under pressure. Grandpa knew. He told me when I was 16, when I was old enough to understand how generational pain works. He said my mom didn't cry at the funeral. She didn't cry because she won. Because silence was her favorite kind of power. So I gave the truth to the town. And the town did what small towns do best. They whispered. They gossiped in grocery aisles. Church ladies crossed themselves twice when they passed my mother on Main Street. People started remembering things differently. The screaming from the windows. The bruises covered in too much foundation. The way my dad looked hollowed out in those final months. My mother started staying home more. Melissa stopped posting inspirational quotes online. Jake stopped bragging in bars. The house got quieter. My phone didn't ring as much. Then, last night, I invited them all back one final time. No food. No warm lighting. No bullshit. Just the three of them in Grandpa's old living room, sitting on couches they never used before he died. I'll make you a deal, I said, standing in front of the fireplace. You want something, anything from what Grandpa left me? Write a public apology. All three of you. Own what you did to me. What you didn't do. Every slap. Every silence, every cruel word. Sign your names to it and post it where people can see it. I let the words sink in, let them feel the full weight of that price. Melissa's lips trembled. Jake looked like he might throw up. My mother went pale. I'll consider it, I added. No promises. But I'll read it. Nobody said a word. And for once, it wasn't because I didn't matter. It was because the cost of being forgiven had finally matched the cost of what they did. And none of them were sure if they could afford it. Pride is a hell of a thing to swallow, especially when it's been sitting in your throat for decades, building up into a hardened crust around your identity until it's all you've got left. That's what I saw in their faces the night I made my offer, three people clinging to the myth of themselves, unable to admit what they'd done, not because it wasn't true, but because saying it out loud would mean giving up the lie they'd built their lives around. And if there's one thing my family never did well, it was accountability. They'd rather lose everything than say the words, I was wrong. So, they said nothing. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not ever. The deadline passed quietly, like a storm that had promised thunder but never bothered to show up. And I let it pass. I didn't follow up, didn't beg, didn't even flinch. I just handed the documents to my lawyer, made it official, and gave the final word to the law, something they couldn't charm, punch, or manipulate their way around. 30 days. That's what the notice said. 30 days to gather up 30 years of bitterness and get the hell out. And on the 30th day, I showed up, not to help them pack, not to hug it out or offer some last-minute olive branch soaked in false forgiveness, but to watch. Because sometimes you have to see the consequences to believe they're real. It was cloudy, no rain, just wind sharp enough to slap skin and cold enough to make noses run. My mother stood on the lawn like a statue someone had knocked off its pedestal, gripping a busted lamp in one hand and a cardboard box in the other, filled with a mess of old photos, costume jewelry, and a half-used bottle of prescription painkillers. She wore the same jacket I remembered from when I was 10, the one she used to wrap around herself while yelling from the porch at my father for not mowing the lawn straight. Jake was pacing near the curb, smoking too fast and trying to act like he wasn't furious. Every few seconds he looked at me, like if he stared hard enough, I'd change my mind. Melissa sat on the steps, mascara smeared, knees pulled to her chest, pretending not to cry while failing spectacularly. None of them said a word when I walked up. Not right away. I just stood there on the sidewalk, arms crossed, taking it all in, the boxes, the memories, the lies packed away like winter clothes no one wanted to wear anymore. And then my mother turned to me. Her voice wasn't angry, not even bitter. Just small. Why are you doing this? She asked, and her words weren't just a question. They were awound looking for a reason, as if maybe I'd invented everything to justify the pain she couldn't remember causing. I didn't yell, didn't spit venom. I just looked her dead in the eyes, and after a long, sharp breath, I finally let it out. Because every Thanksgiving, you made me feel like nothing. Like I was a stain on your good dishes. A mistake you couldn't scrub out no matter how many times you made me clean the damn table. You mocked me in front of your friends, your kids, your church group. You told people I was lazy, stupid, ungrateful. You laughed when I cried. You ignored me when I begged. You taught my siblings to do the same until I started to believe maybe I really didn't deserve better. She blinked, tears welling up, lips moving like she had something to say, but nothing came out. And now I continued, the cold finally biting through my coat, but not touching me in the way it used to. You'll know what that feels like. Every day. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I got in my truck and drove the long way back to Grandpa's house, letting the silence fill up the space where guilt was supposed to be. I passed the hardware store where he used to buy nails by the pound. I passed the diner where we'd eat breakfast every Sunday, no matter how late I'd stayed up the night before. And when I pulled into the gravel drive, the porch light flicked on like it had been waiting for me to come home all along. Inside, everything was still the same. The wood-paneled walls, the creaky floors, the faint scent of tobacco and old leather that lingered no matter how many times I aired the place out. On the mantel above the fireplace sat the photo, me and Grandpa, fishing poles in hand, half smiles on our faces like we knew the fish didn't matter. In the background, barely visible, were Jake and Melissa. Blurred. Distant. Fitting. I stared at that photo for a long time, longer than I meant to. There was peace in it. But there was also something else, something colder. The kind of stillness that follows revenge when you realize it didn't fill the hole you thought it would. 2 weeks later, I got the letter. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Melissa. Inside was a single note on lined paper, written in blue ink with smudges around the edges like she'd been crying when she wrote it. You were right. We were cruel. But are you any better now? I read it twice. Then a third time. My first instinct was to tear it in half. Instead, I lit a match, held it to the corner, and let it burn slow until it curled in on itself like a dying leaf. I dropped it into the old ashtray Grandpa used to keep beside the couch, watched the smoke spiral into the air and vanish. But as I stood there watching the last ember fade, my hand trembled, just a little. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to wonder. Maybe she was right. Maybe revenge doesn't fix the past. It just makes sure nobody forgets it.